the Small Business Committee, with my support, passed out HR 6441, the Women's Business Centers Improvement Act. And this will, again, provide more resources to Women Business Center program, increasing the grants available to them, increasing their capacity to do outreach and to really serve women businesses in the community. We continue to have a lot of global struggles that are affecting women's businesses and other small businesses. These are things like supply chain disruptions. We have a labor shortage. I hear that a lot from the businesses in the community. We have workforce development issues that we really need to address. I'll end with this. We continue to just be in constant dialogue with businesses in this community about what they need and how do we support them, how do we help them flourish. And today I'm actually hosting a jobs fair, and it has over 63 businesses, many of which are women, minority-owned businesses, because we do that kind of outreach, and we want to connect them with people who are looking for work and try to build that good connection in the community. So with that, I will wrap up. Those are some of the things I'm working on. So supply chain, labor shortage, which we're looking at, sort of how do we address that through workforce development, as well as through immigration reform. Health insurance, something else we're very interested in, is making sure our small businesses have affordable health insurance available to them. So those are some of the things we're trying to do as we move forward. So thank you all very much for having me here today.
Yeah, thank you, Congresswoman. So I think we received hundreds of questions. We've seen a lot of enthusiasm for this webcast. I think the opportune time, it's International Women's Day was there, and all the issues and challenges that small businesses are facing, especially women-owned businesses. So we curated some of these questions, which are, I would say, most relevant and most topical. The first question comes from Ken Juta from Snellville, Georgia, which is your state. And her question is that she's a minority businesswoman just starting out. And how can she get approved for business credit and build a credit history from there? Because like a lot of other small businesses, just building a business of personal credit history and leveraging your personal credit all the time is not a good, way of doing it,
Yeah. So some of this is, technical, getting into the weeds. So please reach out. So first of all, actually, let me say, Snellville is in the 7th district. So I am very pleased to see, Conjeta, you here, and thank you for asking these questions. And please know I can directly help you. So my district office in Lawrenceville, we do a lot of work with small businesses, mostly referring them to resources in the community that can really help them. So we have a really great small business development center that is located in Gwinnett, as well as a women's business center, which is located in Norcross. And so we can get you connected with those folks who can help you with some of this technical information. Just to give you a quick overview, but please reach out so you can get more information from the different centers who will really be able to help you. If you're organized as a sole proprietorship, then of course there's no legal separation between your personal and your business credit. If you want to build that business credit, you'll have to operate as an LLC or corporation, and you'll have to establish a credit file then separate from your individual credit. You'll be able to do that. I would, again, encourage you, though, to reach out to the SBDC or to the Women's Business Center, and they can really help you get into the weeds and deal with those things. One of the things that is very important, of course, and I hear a lot from small businesses in the district, such as yourself, and particularly minority and women-owned businesses, is that banks are not going to give them a loan, right? And it's very tough for them to get up and get started. It's hard for any small business, but it's often particularly hard for women, minority-owned businesses. So the SBA has several options for startup business loans and funding, including a microloan program, which provides up to $50,000 in financing. And these are run through nonprofit lenders like community development financial institutions. And we have several of those that operate in Gwinnett and in our community. Additionally, looking forward, we know that more needs to be done in this space. So in a piece of legislation that was moving through Congress, It included $5 billion in total funding to support small businesses and $2 billion for the Small Business Administration to create a direct loan program through the SBA to make loans of up to $150,000 to support underserved small business owners who can't access capital elsewhere. So we are, there are programs in place that can help with your access to capital, and we are looking for more ways to be helpful going forward.
Yeah, and I would like to add here that at Bistocred also we have partnered with a lot of SBA banks and SBA lenders and giving them our BistFlex platform so that they can streamline their SBA lending and do it in a more digital format, because typically SBA lending has been more paper intensive and also slower to deliver. So this is one thing we have been working very closely both with SBA and a lot of SBA lenders, especially in the micro loan and in loans up to $350,000, so that it can be speeded up, and also it makes easier for more startup businesses because for them going online and trying to apply is less intimidating than trying to go to a local bank branch or trying to get information from there. And most of the SBA lenders don't have a lot of bank branches while they can lend nationwide. So that's another thing that we're doing. I think coming from Monica from Chicago, and this is the top of the mind for almost everyone in the country, and especially for small businesses, that current rise in inflation, how that's impacting a lot of these programs to assist women-owned businesses, and what the Congress is thinking about it, or there's some steps to be taken.
So inflation is really affecting everybody right now, and it's very acute in certain sectors. So when you can think of it as, there's a lot of sand in the gears of our economy as we come out of COVID. And I think folks maybe underestimated the impact of what COVID did to both our economy, but also to the global economy. And if you'll recall, back in early 2020, when we were first grappling with COVID, China shut down an entire province for a month or so. And all of the goods and services and things that they produced were shut down. At one point during the crisis, when India was hit with Delta, they shut down the whole country. There were huge shifts in how people consumed goods. Lots of people, including myself, we started working out of our home. We didn't go out to restaurants. We didn't, buy services so much. Nobody was traveling. Nobody was getting in their car. People weren't using rental cars. So it was a massive shift in what we did and how we consume things. And this fluctuation has created all sorts of glitches throughout our economy. One of which is, for instance, in the rental car market. And so nobody rented cars for a while. And those rental cars, every year, those fleets become used cars. But if nobody was renting cars, then there's nothing feeding the used car market. And all of a sudden, there were no used cars available. And so the price of used cars has just shot up. We have all sorts of problems like that. We're seeing that with gas prices. So originally what happened with gas was that nobody was driving. So the demand for gas just plummeted. So all the companies that produce oil and gas, pulled a lot of their production capacity offline. Well, we kind of came out of COVID, we got back, more stable and more to normal, and demand shot up. But all of that production capacity had been pulled offline. And so, that means prices were shooting up. There was more demand for gas than there was supply. Then Ukraine happened, of course. And so, now Russia is threatening the gas supply to Europe, which affects everybody else. So we're in this really turbulent world, and that is creating a lot of these inflation challenges. There are a number of things that we are doing to try to address this. And I just think of it as, we just constantly have to keep unsticking pieces of the economy to get it working for people again. One of this issues is in supply chains. So, as that demand fluctuated, our ports, our truckers, the movement of goods and services was severely disrupted and created this kind of slinky effect where demand plummeted, and then all of a sudden demand shot back up. And so our ports ended up with huge backlogs. So in the infrastructure bill, we put money in there to help increase port capacity. So very locally, for instance, Georgia's port in Savannah got $8 million for a warehouse to help store empty containers so that they wouldn't create backlogs at the port. And with that effort, we have managed to unstick a lot of those backlogs at the port. Things are moving much more smoothly now through that. Then we have the gas price issue. And so, we are dealing with that fluctuation. The president has released the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. So that has added some extra supply. We know OPEC is going to be producing more gas and oil. We actually have 9,000 unused oil and gas leases that have been approved by the federal government on federal lands. And all of that can be accessed to increase that supply to meet the demand. So that's kind of what that process is. I know people are struggling with it, but we are just in a ongoing effort to unstick piece after piece. And I understand in the past couple of days, actually, the oil prices now are starting to drop. But we're going to have to just roll with the punches a bit for probably a few years here as we get things restabilized and back to normal.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I would like to quickly introduce Carolyn Hodges, who is CEO of Association of Women Business Center, and she's joining us from her home in Washington, D.C. And she has a very, I would say, topical question for the Congresswoman. So please, Carolyn.
Thank you so much, Rohit, and it's great to be with you all here, and especially with the Congresswoman, who's been such a champion of the work of women small businesses. So thank you so much for that. And as you mentioned, your committee's unanimous passage of the Women's Business Center Improvement Act of 2022. Of course, it's not law yet, but hopefully we're on a path to make it so. And then, as you mentioned, the $24.4 million of budget that helps grow the program. Today, though, we're here sitting in Women's History Month, and I think it's really important to note that the bill that you passed, if passed into law, would help modernize this Women's Business Center program, as you mentioned, that's remained largely untouched, going back as far as 1988, which I like to tell people is the year that the movie Beetlejuice came out, just as like a point of reference, right? Like it was a while ago. And at that time, though, women's business centers were created to help overcome this greatest barrier that women have for business, to grow or to start a business, which is access to capital. And so fast forwarding to today here, as we sit in 2022, we know that this continues to be such a tremendous challenge. That's why it was so important, and you referenced the work that you did to introduce the bill that extended the most recent round of PPP, which just helped people women in particular, and minority women, who stand at the back of the line when it comes to access to capital. And that afforded the opportunity for them to gain that access, as you mentioned the numbers there. So when we look at some of the opportunities out there, and we think about Congress having done some work to pass legislation prioritizing women and minorities that has recently been struck down by the courts, what opportunities do you see, whether it's in policy or in other areas, to enhance women's access to capital so that they too can participate in building wealth, at the same rate as their American peers?
So thank you for that. And thank you for all of your good work that you do with the Women Business Centers. I just, one, of course, is helping your organization and helping these centers really all around the country so that they can, a lot of this is technical support that women need in order to know how to access capital. As I mentioned, I think there's a lot of potential around these microloan programs. There's a lot of potential around having the Small Business Administration potentially administer its own programs or find other ways for guaranteed loans and ways to help, put our thumb on the scale a little bit to make sure that women-owned businesses are able to access capital, and we're able to overcome, what we know is sort of the, good old boys network and some of the, kind of maybe unintentional, but it's a bit of discrimination, sexism that we see sort of in women's ability to make their case about their financial viability. one of the things I'm very excited about is really trying to increase the capacity of community development financial institutions. I think they've shown a lot of potential in being able to get capital into underserved communities. And then this community navigator program as well. And one of the challenges that we see in my community is they're women owned, but they're also immigrant owned. And so they have, there are lots of language barriers and just kind of unanticipated challenges that they face. Recently, I was able to secure a community project. It was one of these member projects, and it's $100,000 to help our Small Business Development Center offer more in-language services, and that will help, our immigrant-owned businesses, and a host of which are owned by women and who are out there, trying to make their way in a restaurant, cleaning services, nail salons. I can just go on and on, all the wonderful and very vibrant women-owned businesses that we have in this community.
I think what you mentioned there is just perfect, which is just getting a lot of the capital unstuck and getting it into the community where, it's needed. And so I couldn't agree more. And I guess what I would just say is, in addition to women's business centers providing the technical assistance that you mentioned, many people don't know that 40% or more of our women's business centers do have lending in-house, just like the one that's in your district. And so that can also be a place to get that technical assistance, as well as some of those microloans or other type of community loans. Thank you so much.
Very good for everybody to know. Thank you for mentioning that. Yep.
Yeah, so thanks a lot for your time, and I think there were some great insights. I know the challenge is still pretty staggering for small businesses, especially for women-owned small businesses. And one thing I would like to point, I think one point is very important, being a first-generation immigrant myself, is the language barrier. Along with, when you're a woman and a language barrier, that just increases your odds of, getting financing. Even like the problem just surmount one after the other. So we have seen that. Yeah. And being in New York, we see it all the time, especially in Queens and other, boroughs, where there's a lot of diversity in people, and there's women-owned businesses. They're very hardworking people, but the language and the cultural barrier actually holds them back. We have seen that quite a bit. As an organization, we have worked very closely with Axion and some of the other, micro lenders. And one thing I have to say, coming from India, is that, India has done a fabulous job with, expanding the role of micro lenders, actually, and I think that's something that in US, we have talked about it a lot with policymakers as well as with micro lenders themselves. But I think we still have a lot of ground to cover, because the number of micro businesses in the country is fairly large, and the women-owned, minority-owned micro businesses is, even as a percentage, is even bigger. And I think that's where micro lenders can play a very big role. And I think that's one thing that, as a policymaker and as private sector guys like us, and as Corinne in the, I would say somewhere in the middle, I think it's very important that how do we make the micro lending sector in US, because typically micro lending has been more prevalent in emerging economies and poorer countries. And I think everybody thinks from outside of US that, US is a rich country, so everybody is rich, but that's not true. There's a lot of income disparity and a lot of opportunity disparity. So how we address that, and how I think as a policymaker thinking about that piece, because I think that's something that, as policymakers, as private sector, as somebody else, we need to pay more attention. And one thing, good thing that has happened because of COVID is that all the inhibitions that small businesses had towards online channels has gone away, because all their money they got during PPP was online and EIDL. And I think that's a great opportunity to go back, and because most of these micro lenders don't have the budget or the staff to man like hundreds of branches. But what they can do is that they can set up a good online platforms and can help a lot of these customers in their own language, in their own environment, to get better access to credit.
Okay, well, I think that is very, very important. And one of the things I found when we did this, we've done several times, where I just walk around and I talk to small business owners in the district. And as fate would have it, many of them were women-owned and minority-owned. And the thing that was really evident to me was that one of the barriers is they're just so busy running their business that it's very hard for them to know about that, all the resources available, in a sense, to build that future plan. And I was talking with the small business administrator here in Georgia, and Terry Dennison, and said, we may just need to create some kind of, door-to-door squad, group that goes out there and just with a laptop and sits down with the small business owners and goes through some of the resources that are available to them, meet them where they are. We keep saying, come see the AWBC, come see the SBDC, come talk to them, but they're so busy. They're just trying to hang in there. And, are there ways we can be more proactive at doing that outreach? A quick example is that a lot of them didn't know that they could apply for health insurance through healthcare.gov, and that the rates had dropped dramatically because of some of the changes we made in the American Rescue Plan. And just telling them that alone, I would just hand them my card with the healthcare.gov, go look it up and see what you can get. A lot of them were uninsured, and that alone was extremely helpful, but they just didn't have time. They're not out there reading the web. They're not out there, they're trying to just keep things going. So, to your point, that micro lending plus having, really trying to be a bit more proactive about getting out there to folks.
No, I think that's a very relevant point, because that's the other thing. The small business owners are very time starved, and they're just like so focused on running their businesses, keeping their shop open, meeting their payrolls, and it gets very tough time for them to just keep track of things. Yeah. Especially that really impact them, including health insurance and other things. So I think very valid point about, like outreach to them where they are, and not expecting to come to a place where it's more organized or something, because they don't have time, they don't have the bandwidth to go. So it's like, it reminds me of vaccination drives that used to take place in emerging markets. Till the time you had these centers, nobody used to come. Once you started going to homes or to places where they used to live, the vaccination rate just went up, pretty significantly. So I think the same thing is here, is that how do you go to these clusters? Because the good thing in America is that they are clusters, so you can identify them and you can go there and educate them there, and that will have a far-reaching impact on just like making them aware about things, and that's it. Once you do that and you have a good online platform for them to apply or to make use of it, then they will use it, pretty significantly.
Yeah. Well, great.
Yeah. So thank you for your time, and it was I hope it's very insightful discussion as well as information, and I think this will really help small businesses in general, and especially women-owned small businesses, to think about something new, and also think about that yes, there is a lot of opportunity, and also there are challenges, but at the same point of time, if navigated the right way, they can still succeed in a big way.
Okay. Well, great to be here and great to visit with you all. Take care.
Yeah. So now, I think it was a great session, and the Congresswoman, spent a pretty valuable part of her time doing this, now, and I would like to thank her for that. And now we will encourage some more audience participation, which we do in every of our webinars, where we do an audience poll. That helps us in two ways. It helps us to gauge that what people are thinking, and also what are the things that we should help to address those. So our first question is about what are the common challenges and the concern that you are facing as a business owner right now. And I think while you guys can, the participants can participate in the poll, and then we will actually give them the results, and then it will be followed by a second question in few minutes after that. So in the meanwhile, I will invite now Carolyn Hodges, who's CEO of Association of Women Business Centers, who just asked that I would say very relevant question to the Congresswoman to make her presentation. Just as an introduction, the Association of Women Business Center is a non-for-profit organization which is helping women-owned businesses to achieve economic justice and also open up entrepreneurial opportunities for them. And they support over 100 plus women business centers all across the country. So without any further ado, Carolyn, the stage is yours, and please.
Well, very good. Though since you pulled up the poll, I'm not actually able to see what's on the screen. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm the CEO of the Association of Women's Business Centers, and I had the opportunity to join and help lead this organization and the program really in January of 2019, which gave me 1 full year to kind of get my feet underneath me before this whole pandemic thing happened. And I distinctly remember January 2020 when the discussion around disaster relief was happening in the legislature, and we really hadn't even become aware of the first COVID case yet in the United States. And it was at that time that we raised our hand and said, if there's going to be a disaster here, we know women's business centers are going to be the economic first responders. And so as a result of that, we were successful in leveraging some funding for women's business centers from the CARES Act, which I'm going to be able to talk about in a couple of minutes, really helped bring to light the kind of impacts that women's business centers have when they're more appropriately or adequately funded to meet the demand that small businesses have out there in the field, and especially in the face of a crisis such as we've had. The slide mentions I was born in Grand Rapids, Michigan, so I'm a Midwesterner, but I'm also bilingual, given the fact that I got the chance to study abroad in Spain. So that's been also a great help as we're supporting this national network of, we've got now 140 women's business centers and providing services in as many as 30 different languages all across the country. So I can certainly identify at least with some portion of the clients that we serve. And I mentioned that the pandemic brought unique challenges, obviously, to businesses. And because they were so abruptly affected by the pandemic, they were immediately looking for resources to help them. And thankfully, many of them did find their way to women's business centers. And some of that was owed to the fact that Congress members like Congresswoman Bourdeaux actually communicated that these women's business centers and the other SBA resource partners were a viable option through their constituent communications. So definitely being on the mailing list and being in communication with your members of Congress can be a great way to know about the things that the federal government supports. When 2021, we sort of look at the 2021 over the previous fiscal year, 2020, we were instrumental in meeting that demand and meeting the needs of businesses over and above the number of clients that we saw prior to that. So when you look at the number of clients that we're serving and the number of new businesses started, it's somewhat staggering that, you know, we were able to help more businesses get started at a time of such economic challenge, and even increase the number of jobs that were supported by the network. So this just goes to the kind of outcomes that women's business centers are having on that kind of macro or national perspective. So we can go to the next slide there. So what do women's business centers do? When you walk into a women's business center, you're going to encounter like an intake process. They want to know who you are and like what stage of business you're in. Are you starting up? And many businesses will find their way into one of sort of 3 like tracks. And counseling, one-on-one counseling is one of those tracks. That counseling is free. And we saw a huge uptick in the number of clients counseled, as well as the hours of counseling. One thing that's unique about the clients that we serve, which by the way, it's about 70% of the clients that we serve are women, and more than half of our clients identify as people of color. These clients in particular would be primarily in the category of like economically and socially disadvantaged, which is the sort of statutory language that we are identified with needing to serve. These are the clients that really demand more time to get the kinds of results that you might see in some of the other SBA resource partners. So we spend on average, 2 hours or more with one client providing counseling. And then they may go to another track of service, such as training or some of our network opportunities, and then also access to capital. So you can see we like do more counseling, we counsel more people, and we've got more training sessions happening even throughout the pandemic. So we talked about, I just mentioned capital. Women's business centers are just so important in terms of the solution and in the mix to get access to capital. And just as the Congresswoman had mentioned, I mean, SBA flooded the market in a way with lots of options, whether it was the PPP or the economic injury disaster loan that was specific to COVID. And so we saw this pendulum swing of the type of capital that our clients were accessing away from non-SBA loans and toward SBA products, and primarily those forgivable like the PPP. So that would explain the major upswing in sort of SBA loans versus the non-SBA loans. So that's good news because a lot of that stuff was forgivable. You can go to there we go. When we look at capital infusion, we think about the amount of dollars or funding. Capital is just another word for funding. We think about the funding that's getting into the businesses. And so we did see like a net increase in the amount of working capital, of funding that was able to get into the businesses, and as well as equity infusion. And a 20% increase is pretty significant year over year when you think about the number of clients that we saw didn't increase by 20%, and yet our equity infusion was substantially grown there. So lots of great impacts. Women's Business Center sort of achieving more with doing less. And we've got a success story that sort of demonstrates what this looked like in the early stages of the pandemic. And I chose this story out of the state of Washington really because when we remember back to when the first health impacts of the pandemic hit our country, I think some of the first cases were identified in the state of Washington. And so they were sort of the first to shut down and the first to have to experience, they were sort of the guinea pigs in this whole process. And so we have a Women's Business Center there in Seattle, Washington, who's directed by Susan Perot. And she really exemplified resilience by a Women's Business Center and helping her clients do the same. And so they were able to quickly pivot and provide guidance on staffing, payroll, the supply chain issues, marketing, e-commerce. And this just sort of demonstrates the wide variety of areas where Women's Business Centers can have tremendous expertise. But over and above all of that, they are consistently successful in helping individuals who might have otherwise been defined as, unbankable or under-resourced. And so this is just a great opportunity for businesses who may have knocked on doors and had the doors, closed in their face. We certainly want to be sure they can find a Women's Business Center. So there is a link that can help you identify where a Women's Business Center may be near you. And that website is right here, awbc.org. You could just go there and you can find it, or if you want to type in the /WBC-locator, we know that you can find a Women's Business Center near you. And if it's a couple of hours drive away, don't be intimidated by that. Many of the Women's Business Centers are offering virtual appointments and remote assistance, so we'd be glad to help you.
Yeah, thanks for, I would say, the presentation, and also I think very timely information on the amount of capital access that your centers have been able to provide. I think that's very impressive, especially during COVID, I think when things were so tough. So we'd like to bring the poll results back, which is very interesting that the impact of pandemic is still pretty widespread, as we had said earlier, that women-owned businesses we saw in our study this year had a disproportionate amount of impact because of the COVID-19 crisis. And we still see that the lower revenue due to pandemic is still the biggest worry at like 50% plus, which is very significant, followed by obviously rising interest rates as well as high inflation. And Corinne, I would like you also to comment on these findings and what do you think about it, since you deal with a lot of women-owned businesses.
Well, I mean, first of all, it's just, it's remarkable that the poll here of the participants in the call, those numbers seem to look a lot like the study you all conducted. And so kudos to you on your data poll, because it was quite accurate. And I think certainly reflects what we are seeing across the client base of Women's Business Centers. And, I sort of, I think about how the situation that we're in today, and we look at the lower revenue due to pandemic or economic effects situation, it is not uncommon for a small business to find themselves in a position of economic predicament. Congresswoman Bourdeaux mentioned her father's business and how, selling those creative animal hats, and how in the crash of the 1990s, they lost that business. Well, unfortunately, that's the kind of thing that businesses encounter: changes in technology, changes in the environment, and you've got to have someone in your corner. You've got to have advice, and you've got to have a good place to go get training to pivot or to rethink. And startup businesses are also experiencing often the same sort of fits and starts to their businesses. And so I like to just tell people to remember that if you're failing, fail fast, and remember that plan B is better, because plan A is always the thing we think is going to be the right plan. But once we adapt ourselves to circumstances, plan B can end up being a much bigger, better, more profitable opportunity. And so I just say, keep your chin up and know that women's business centers are in your corner, and they'll be happy to help you. But what we're seeing in your data and in the poll today is unfortunately, it's consistent with what we see out in the field.
Yeah, no, I think that's true, that the impact has been pretty widespread, and although it has created a worry among a lot of small businesses, especially minority and women-owned, that even a lot of them are even fighting for survival right now. We are seeing that in our data. The drop has been so dramatic, and now I think while the economy comes back, it will be interesting to see with increasing inflation and also with the higher interest rates, how much impact that will have. And thanks a lot for your presentation. I think it's very insightful, and also your feedback and comments on the poll questions. And with this, I would like to present some of the key findings from our poll, from our study. In the meanwhile, we have brought up our second question. And so this helps us again to serve you guys better. This also helps us to figure out, because since we interact with a lot of policymakers and folks like Carolyn, Hodges, and other SBDCs and other institutions, to also, give them an idea about both using our, I would say, data as well as the poll responses to help them, educate them, and also inform them about things that are happening and what policymakers should be looking at in terms of either intervention or in terms of when they're enacting any new laws or allocating the budget, which is the mandate of the Congress every year, that which are the pain points and the areas that they need to focus on. So I think it's a very important exercise in that sense, because it helps us to get educated, and then we can educate other folks out there. And it also helps us to get a pulse of small business owners in this country, that what they are doing, how they are doing, what are the challenges, and who they are really, actually. So with this, I would like to present the last part of our webcast today, and to talk about, about our annual study, which has been pretty, I would say, well received over the years, and also pretty well mentioned in the media. And our 2022 study is, I would say, very important, because this is the first study which actually looks in the COVID era, and I would say part of it would be a little bit would be like what post-COVID world will look like. And obviously, when we do the study in 2023, it will be very interesting to compare that with our 2022 study. And we had over 100,000 plus financing applications. Obviously, the demand has been pretty high over the last 2 years, or say year and a half. And approximately 1/3 of the applicants identified themselves as women-owned businesses. And this is a very interesting study, that the pendulum is shifting. So we have seen that Texas is where the most business loan applications are originating, which is not surprising. I would say California used to lead, but pre-COVID and during COVID, we have seen that a lot of small businesses, even the new businesses which have been incorporated and existing businesses are moving out from states like California. And where are they landing? They're landing in states like Texas and Georgia or Florida. And that's where we are seeing more and more, loan requests also coming in, which is, I would say, this also shows that the role of local taxation, and more than the taxation, I would say the local business regulation plays a very big role in how overall small businesses actually perform, how much access to credit they really need, and also the fact that what is the cost of doing business. So I think that's a very important, finding in our study, and that also shows the trends that where the businesses are moving. So that's a good guidance for anybody who's looking to start a small business right now. That what are the best states to go? And we also do a top 25 city survey every year and a study, and that is something that mirrors quite a bit movements like what we are seeing right now. I think this is an important piece about, last year was a very significant year in terms of the amount of help that the government came out in terms of PPP and the EIDL program. And since Biz to Credit was a pretty active PPP platform, one thing we're very proud to say is that, 49, the proportion of women business owners that received PPP funding from us was 49%, which was significantly higher compared to more well-established SBA lenders where it was 34%. That's another proof point of what we have been saying, that if you give the right information and right tools to businesses, small businesses, especially the ones who are women-owned and minority, where there's more barrier to either language, they don't have old boys network, they don't know where to go, then they're more adaptive in nature and they're willing to try new things. And this is a very significant number, that 49% are women-owned businesses. That clearly shows that you can actually bridge a lot of the gender gap and the revenue gap, which leads to less access to credit by actually using smarter online platforms. Obviously, last year, what we have seen is that, there was a decline in revenue from 2020 to 2021. Obviously, 2020 also, a lot of businesses bore the brunt of the COVID, which continued in 2021. So 4% decline was on top of the decline that we saw in 2022. So a significant decline over the last 2 years. I think the other thing is that women-owned businesses revenue is 30% lower than men-owned businesses. And that, I think, is the most significant, one of the most significant findings of the study. And that leads to other things: less access to credit, less opportunities, less resources, and that leads to the women-owned businesses being inherently more fragile and weaker than men-owned businesses. And that's something that, all of us need to address because that has been one of the most enduring findings of our studies over the years, that women-owned businesses have been consistently, have less revenue, have lesser growth than the men-owned businesses. So I think this is one point that we need to address much more significantly and in a much better way, actually. And then what are the challenges? So the challenges are there are lower approval rates because of the things that we just discussed. The credit score we have seen is less for women-owned businesses than men-owned businesses, because most of the small business loans still come with a personal guarantee. Most of the lenders still review your personal credit, and that leads to more paperwork. That leads to much worse experience in our view, and that also leads to more frustration, a feeling of lack of transparency, and then you have to justify more, that why you should get the money, because if your revenues are lower, your profits are less, and your credit score is lower, then that leads to more questions and more challenges. So I think these have been the endemic issues that women-owned businesses have faced over the years, and as the polls have shown that the biggest worry is drop in revenue and also sustainability of the businesses, and that I think is going to impact access to credit for even this year. because of the historical data, which looks much weaker than what it was pre-COVID. I think I would say our last slide in this webcast today is that what is in store for 2022. That I think is the most important thing, because what has happened has happened. It was not in our control. It was in natural, I would say, a calamity. And I think the biggest thing that is happening is forgiveness. So if you have taken a PPP loan, this is the time to apply for forgiveness, get that done. Because if you don't apply for forgiveness, then you won't get, then you have to pay it back. And if you haven't spent all the money in an allocated way, then you can pay back the money, because at the end of the day, it's a very low cost, medium term capital being provided. I think the other big thing is going to be that interest rates are going to rise pretty significantly. One thing that people should realize in an SBA loan is that a vast majority of the SBA loans are floating loans. So unlike a mortgage, you cannot lock in a rate. When the Fed is going to increase the rates, all SBA loans are tied to US prime, and you will have to pay a higher rate even on the existing loans. So keep that in mind when you're borrowing money, because we are going to see 175 to 200 bips of increase in interest rates. This interest rate increase looks like will continue even in 2023. So what we are forecasting here is that SBA loans will get expensive by anywhere between 250 to 300 bips over next year to year and a half. And so you will have to figure that or account for it when you're applying for a loan, and the increased payments that it will mean, and are they going to be sustainable for you? I think, as I said earlier, most of the large majority of SBA loans and lines of credit are variable interest rates. So as a business owner, you can't do much in terms of having a fixed rate product. But at the same point of time, you can look for some alternatives out there which have fixed rate products. And I think the key thing is also being more aware and have a business plan, have a financial plan. Because what we foresee in 2022 is no more government aid, economy slowing down. Also, with increased cost of capital, it's going to get much tougher. So that's why having those conversations around things like access to credit, how you build a sustainable business, how do you build a better cash flow, how do you keep your fixed cost low is extremely important as of now. So with this, I would like to, bring in the poll results, and then, and as Biz to Credit, we're always there to help business owners, and I would like to thank all the participants today. I'd also like to thank all the people who have registered for today's webcast, as well as all our esteemed speakers and the guests. And I think everybody will find it very helpful, and we'll see you again sometime during the summer to talk about some of these topical issues around small businesses and their opportunities and challenges that they're facing.
Thank you very much, Rohit, and thank you to all the speakers who joined in today's special event with Biz to Credit and AWBC as the presenting hosts. As we conclude this special event webcast, we want to make you aware of resources that are available to business owners that have been provided by the hosts of today's event. As mentioned earlier, the AWBC has a locator on their website that can help women entrepreneurs find a local center for assistance, even schedule a virtual visit with a specialist or a counselor, and where they can get help with everything from business planning and startup resources to financing and leadership and mentorship. Visit awbc.org to take advantage of these resources and to learn more. And at Biz to Credit, we are committed to providing financing to more small businesses and helping business owners secure the best funding options for each and every project or capital need, with technology that makes business financing easy to understand and easier to access. Biz to Credit financing includes fixed rate options, which business owners can qualify for within 24 hours of submitting an online application. You can visit biz2credit.com. If you already have an account, you can log in the top right-hand corner, or you can apply online and submit an application in just over 4 minutes. So as we sign off for today's webcast, we will direct you to some of these resources and do really appreciate your attendance and participation in the event. If you have asked us a question during the course of today's session, you'll expect some follow-up from our customer service team, who will be reaching back to you over email after the conclusion of the event. So at this time, that concludes the broadcast of today's special event, Examining the Future for Women-Owned Businesses, a discussion with Representative Carolyn Bourdeaux of Georgia. Today's webcast was presented by Biz2Credit, featuring the Association of Women's Business Centers. A recording of today's special event will be made available in the Biz2Credit COVID-19 Webcast Center following the conclusion of the session. And if you registered for this event or had a colleague who registered, you will receive a follow-up email with a link to that recording. At this time, your session will now disconnect. Thank you for joining us.